Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Tuesday at about 9:15. Hope everyone's doing good. Pretty gray and cold October day. This week it is Tuesday. Today's Tuesday, so this week is Halloween. The my favorite holiday of all time. So I hope people have some fun plans, or maybe they've done things for Halloween already. It's always funny because I think obviously around the holidays, people do, well, Thanksgiving, people have friendsgiving, where they get together with their friends and they have a separate thing from doing the normal family things. A lot of the times, people have, that's kind of a bigger thing now. And then Christmas, obviously, that's a big time for, you know, Christmas parties, people at work parties and things like that. At work, where I am at Montessori, we have a nice. We usually do a big Christmas party. About a week. I think it's about a week before Christmas, and then also around Halloween. There's the thing with Halloween is there's always events. There's parties. There's usually lots of things going on. Like I played at a Halloween show almost 2 weeks ago, which is kind of odd, I think, but it was like almost 2 weeks ago. So, and I'm a firm believer of like doing things. A lot of times people have celebrations around the day of, their birthday. They'll even do big parties, but it might not be on their actual birthday because of, you know, their schedule or what have you. But it's funny on Halloween. There's not usually a whole lot of things to do on the actual date. Like usually it's a big bar weekend the week before or the subsequent weekend before that. Like I was saying, I played a gig almost 2 weeks ago, and that will be this that was a Halloween thing, and there was stuff this past weekend. I knew people had parties, so it's funny. So, but Halloween's my favorite holiday of all time. So I'm gonna have a little wanted to do something fun and something not too, I guess, extravagant, but I'm gonna have some friends over and we're gonna eat a bunch of Halloween candy, eat some pizza. We're gonna get order some pizzas and get a bunch of beer, some popcorn, and we're gonna watch the first two Halloween movies, the original. And I picked both of those up. I've had actually Halloween 2, the second one, the original, for a few years on Blu-ray. I picked it up somewhere, and it's a pretty good edition of that movie, and I do love that movie. But for actually a long time, I've been searching out to find a really definitive version of John Carpenter's Halloween on Blu-ray. I mean, that movie obviously is incredibly popular, incredibly iconic, and again, it is one of the greatest slasher movies of all time. But there's so many editions of that movie on Blu-ray, in 4K, and but for some reason I was not able to find a really good version that had some good special features on it, but then also just a really good transfer. And finally bought it on Blu-ray last year. I bought it at the same time that I also bought Halloween Ends, which I actually really like, which definitely in the minority with that film. But so that's the plan. We're gonna watch both of those movies, both the first two original Halloween movies on Blu-ray on Halloween, eating copious amounts of pizza and candy and beer. So it'll be fun. I'm excited. I had this idea of maybe recording it for a Film Fanatic show, but we'll see. I don't know. Maybe it'd be, I don't know. We'll see. But chances are we're gonna just keep it as it is. So this will be fun. I'm looking forward to it. But today's show is on. I'm gonna do a few shows on some new films that I just saw through Opera House Video. That's where I go usually to stay up on new films. I usually rent DVD versions of those films. I typically go there, a few times a month. I don't go there as much just because I've been pretty busy here with films that I have and really enjoying those films. I shouldn't say busy. I should say it's an activity. It's a fun form of therapy, if you will. So, and it's funny. It's funny. I have this thing around doing my film fanatic work that I do. I typically like, I technically run 3 pages for my film fanatic interests and my and the whole thing. My Instagram page got hacked, and so that died. And then I had to put up a new one, but I'm not really on Instagram so much with films right now. I'm gonna start putting more stuff up. I was super bummed about that whole incident, and there's times where when I had 3 pages going, it can kind of get to be a lot of work as far as you know doing the videos, promoting the videos, posting the videos, but then I'll also do separate shows where I'm going to do an actual review of the film with just written text. And there's times where like, wow, okay, it's almost starting to feel like a job. And it's funny, right as that happens, I stop, I pull back, and I'm like, no, I enjoy this. I'm not making this into a job. Yeah, it would be cool to, if I make money doing it, sure, but I totally love doing this. It's a pure fun outlet. If I could do it full time, I probably would. Um, but I enjoy it. I enjoy it so much. So that's just kind of how I react to it if it starts becoming a job. And I don't. I want to always enjoy it. I always want to love it, and I always want to try to improve. You know, upon where things are at that time. So one of the brand new movies that I watched, well, I shouldn't say brand new, but it came out in 2023, and that is a film called Cobweb. It was directed by Samuel Bowden. Pretty good cast with Anthony Starr, Lizzie Capstan, or Lizzie Capian, Cleopatra Coleman, and Woody Norman. The way I heard about this film was through a couple of YouTube guys that I watch. This movie came out during the whole time, and Oppenheimer came out and Barbie. This movie, I guess, had one of the worst kind of campaigns as far as promotion. I don't even there was a trailer, but basically this movie came out and died instantly, and it came out during the time when both of those movies kind of set the world on fire, which is like, I don't know. I kind of feel like it's, I don't know. I don't get why those movies were as popular as they were. I thought Barbie was actually a better movie in some ways. I think it just had more of an entertainment value to it. It's easier to digest. Oppenheimer is just like, ugh. It's a. I've seen that movie twice, and it is a tall. To get through that movie, you need a giant glass of water. It's wicked dry. Barbie, I thought was actually pretty funny. I thought it was the satire around it was cool. It was entertaining. It had some uh, it had some variety to it. It wasn't so serious and almost overwhelming, which I felt Oppenheimer was. But anyway, Cobweb came out during that weekend and is a horror movie, and it totally bombed. It had, from what I had read about this movie, it really was, they the ball dropped. They just really didn't do any work to promote this movie, which I think is a shame because this movie has some very interesting things around it. There are some moments where I think are generally very good. But so today's show is on Cobweb, and I rented this movie last week, and I thought that this movie was pretty cool. I thought it's I saw it pretty cold. I didn't know much about it, and it's essentially, I think this movie, you could say it's like a dark fairy tale. It's a kind of a heightened reality. It's set for it's set in the time 1 week before Halloween. It is a good movie to watch on Halloween, I would imagine. I watched it the other night, and it was funny when I was watching it. I brought it over to my parents. We had dinner, and we usually traditionally always watch a ton of movies. And when I popped in the movie, I realized, oh wait, this movie is set, the time period is a week before Halloween. So I thought that was pretty funny. But the cast for this movie is really good, particularly around the parents. Anthony Starr and Lizzie Capian are pretty outstanding. The little boy played by Woody Norman, his character is very very cool. This movie has it's kind of a slow burn in the beginning, but there's a lot of cool atmosphere. It's beautifully shot, I will say that. There is particularly around the dynamic. Essentially, this movie is about a kid who is getting bullied and who is obviously having a really terrible time. And one of his teachers suspects that something is going on with him and also his family. So she kind of takes it upon herself to kind of look into the matter, like what's going on. And this movie has a real slow burn, a subtle kind of introduction to what's going on. But the characters around the parents they're pretty fantastic. Like they're literally creepy as all hell, incredibly scary, and great atmosphere. This movie does have some really cool atmosphere. It's and it's a shorter film. It's like an hour and a half. But ultimately, there were some things around this movie that really kind of bugged me and kind of took me out of the movie. It was so close. I felt to being something really unique. That I would almost put up there with other films that I really loved this year, as far as newer films, movies like Long Legs or The Substance, especially The Substance, or Maxine, or In a Violent Nature. All of those films I really, really loved that came out this year. In this film, I almost thought, okay, maybe this is going to be, included in that list. But there were a few things around this film, particularly around. There is a character in this who plays the little boy's teacher, and there's a few situations where she is suspecting that something horrific is happening, and something terrible is happening with this kid, at school, and then also mainly at home. And so she kind of takes it upon herself to kind of go to the house and to basically inquire. And I honestly thought that I get why they were doing that, but I just felt like it was a little bit much. And I know this movie is a like a child's story. It's about his perspective, and it's a fairy tale, a dark, like a grim fairy tale. But I honestly felt that, like, that action by the teacher to kind of insert herself and to kind of push her way through was a little bit overly dramatic and wouldn't really happen in a million years. I thought it was a little bit silly and just a little bit ridiculous, because in a million years, this movie I obviously is set in a heightened reality. It is it's a fantasy. It has to me but it is a little bit. There are aspects of this film where it's kind of grounded in reality. We have seen that story many times as far as bullying. I mean, that's a real life horror that kids go through. But I thought the actions of the teacher were, I don't know, I kind of felt it was honestly a little bit ridiculous. Instead of her following the chain of command, I kind of felt like even though she was acting out of the kindness of her heart, I kind of felt like she overstepped her bounds. And in a realistic situation, like, well, for instance, I've worked in school districts for a long time, and I have dealt with that very situation with kids numerous times, many many times, so many times I can't even count, unfortunately. And never in a million years would a teacher, like, there's a protocol, when you suspect something, and never in a million years would a teacher do that, because if a teacher took that, took that route, they would be reprimanded, and they would be essentially made to be the bad guy, because there's a chain of command. There's kind of a protocol on what you would do to follow up with those things, or if you suspect something. And I don't know. It just felt like it was a little bit. It was overly dramatized for the sake of the movie, and I just thought it was a little bit silly. So I didn't really think that that was really the best move. They could have drawn it out a little bit more, made it even more suspenseful. Um, there's a film that came out last year, even though it's not a horror film. It's very much a suspense film. A movie called Loosh with Tim Roth and Naomi Camp. I can't remember her name. Tim Roth is in it, and there's a movie about this. Their son is suspected of doing some very bad things, and there's this relationship between the son, who is his name is Lush, and the teacher that are very. There's things that happen between the two of them that are very questionable, and you kind of don't know who the bad guy is or who is the good guy per se. It's a very interesting movie, and it's about that dynamic of shit that's going wrong and things that are really being mishandled. And even in that film, like, it's a heightened story, but it is very real. There isn't there's a chain of command that the parents follow and the teachers follow, and they kind of stick to what you would probably do, or what would be your choice of action in a real life scenario. So I don't know. I thought that that was kind of a poor decision. I know it's a horror movie. It is a fantasy, but I kind of was with it. I kind of thought it was cool. I thought the way the story evolved, even after that part of the movie, I thought it was still pretty interesting, and I thought it really did create a really interesting atmosphere. And there was also another situation in the film that I thought was, again, this, like the same thing with Around the Teacher. I felt it was like overly dramatic and kind of, well, borderline ridiculous, where it was, okay, what's the motivation for the kid to take that action, to go that far? Like, it was a little bit much, instead of doing it in maybe a different light, or building that up a little bit more. But essentially what happened, the next part of the film, where I was like, again, like I said, that I was like questioning it, and and felt in the moment that that was a a poor decision for them, or area for them to go. It just took me out of the movie. It was a little bit ridiculous. So, like I said, with the teacher scenario and how her character kind of put herself at the at the forefront as far as dealing with the situation with the family, that was a bad call, I think, because it took me out of the movie. And so what happens? The other example of that, there is the bully situation with the boy. There's a situation where basically the bully takes the kid's pumpkin that he gets, and it's this big, giant, gorgeous pumpkin, and he trips the kid on the playground and smashes the pumpkin in front of him. And then the kid goes home miserable. So the school finds out what had happened, and basically they make the kid go out and buy him a another pumpkin and give it to him in class. And they make him do it in the classroom, and they make him do it in this very humiliating way, which again would not be something that would probably happen in reality. So what ends up happening because of that is that the kid basically decides to seek revenge on him, and he basically gets a group of these of his friends, and they're all like older kids, to go to his house to like basically kill all of the family. And suddenly the film is strange because it like and I was into it, but the movie suddenly becomes this thing of where it's initially this dark fairy tale, kind of a gothic horror film, and it's very subtle. I think the atmosphere is really cool. The kind of the horror elements are really really interesting and engaging. And suddenly it feels like once this group of kids that they decide to go to the house, it like takes on this thing of like the purge. Like it feels like it's a purge movie all of a sudden. And I was into it. I thought it was cool. And at that point, the monster of the film is kind of a part of the story and basically takes out all these kids. And there are some really good kills in this movie. There are some really, really great suspense, some very, very engaging, suspenseful moments in this film. There's some really good suspenseful moments of this film. Like I said, I think this movie is probably worth watching. But again, those two key moments in the film where I just felt a little bit much, and I don't know, especially around the teacher dynamic. I can kind of understand to a degree about the kid's motivation to basically get his friends to go and to go to the little boy's house after being kind of humiliated, but I don't know. But I was still into the movie, and I thought, okay, the dynamic of this film is changing, and it felt like suddenly it's kind of this purge movie, which was like a little bit interesting, but a little bit, I don't know, maybe off-putting, because they come to the house with like bats and weapons, and they're wearing these masks and this whole thing, and it's kind of cool. It's kind of interesting, and I kind of thought it was cool. I was into it to a degree. Like some of the kills were awesome. The atmosphere was still really really great. There's are there are a few things that happen, particularly around the parents, that I was really really surprised. So, and at this point, the monster, if you will, is kind of unleashed, and she's picking off everyone in the house, including these kids that show up to kill the family. So, and the kills are really, really great. But then I felt, and they do a really good job without showing the monster per se. There's a lot of quick cuts, and you get these tiny little glimpses of the monster that are really good, really effective. But then what ends up happening towards the end of the film, two things happen that I honestly felt took me out of the movie. One being, it felt like after around the time when the monster per se, that the creature is now in the story, and it's more or less fully realized and is going on this murderous rampage in the house. After some of those kills, it felt like it suddenly became this kind of generic movie, horror film that we've seen. It felt like it could have been any of the crappy movies that come out now. Like the Conjuring Part 6, or any of the Bloomhouse films that come out. It just felt like it became this like standard, generic jump scare after jump scare kind of scenario, and it was like, it just had trope after trope, and I just felt like after that those things happened and it got into that space, it got really, it got really generic. And and I was like, okay, this could be any, and I felt at that point my eyes kind of glazed over a little bit. I was kind of checking out because it was suddenly became this like just standard generic kind of horror movie that just gets put out in the theater that has no imagination and no creativity. But that is it's subjective. You could say, you know, you could take a movie that has every stereotype or trope in the horror genre, but if it's done and directed really, really well, then it's probably going to be still a good film. And that doesn't mean, it inherently doesn't mean that the tropes are bad or the jump scare. But if it's handled really, really well by a skilled director, it can work. And I agree with that. There was a review of this film where the guys who were Red Letter Media, who were fantastic reviewers, but they were talking about how they actually really like this movie or love this movie, and they were saying, well, because they're really highly critical, and some of their fan base was saying, well, how can you like this movie so much because you guys are vehemently calling out films for following all of these tropes all the time, and their response was basically like, well, if it's in if the film is in the hands of somebody who's like really skilled, like a really skilled director, and can really tie everything together, then it doesn't matter because it becomes a good movie, and that's an interesting point because I agree with that. That's a pretty fair, kind of assessment of a movie on how a movie can work or a movie that can't work, or won't work. So that's pretty fair, and I kind of agree with that. But I honestly felt, for me personally, it took me out of the movie. But the main thing that really I felt was really disappointing was about this film was when they show. There's a moment in the film where they actually show the monster, and that is again another trope that we see in a lot of modern horror films. Is that there are all of these, whether it's a Conjuring movie or what have you. There's always this thing of where, there is, for instance, that movie Smile that came out, and then there's also a second one. But there's so many examples of that in modern horror where we will see glimpses of the monster, and then the third act there is the big the monster reveal, and we see the monster fully realized. uh, that was the case with the last Demeter, the Dracula film that came out last year. We see glimpses of the monster, but then there's the big reveal. And that movie was, kind of turned into a shit show because of how terrible it was. And I've seen that so many times, but what happens in Cobweb is that there is that build up, build up, build up, and then finally there's the reveal of the monster, and you see the monster more or less close up and in your face, and I felt like it was terrible. Like it's such shitty CGI. And I was like, why did they show it? Why did they show this creature? They did such a good job at times of just showing these little glimpses of the monster, or not even going there, and you just get the sense of the presence of the monster in the room or in the location. Like that was way more effective. But when they actually show the monster, it was just in all honesty, I just think it was just really terrible, shitty CGI. And I thought that was a terrible call. And once that happens, once they do the big reveal, there's still about, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes or so to the film. And I honestly felt like at that point, it took me out of the movie. It took me totally out of the fucking movie. You know, I used The Last of Meter as an example, like where I felt that movie had some really cool moments. It could have done so many cool things. There were some really bad choices as far as the writing of that movie, but there were some really cool moments and great. There was this great build up, and they don't show the Dracula or the monster character very much. You get glimpses of them, but there is that kind of thing that happens at the end or the third act, like what happens in virtually every new horror film, and they show the creature, and it's terrible. It's like completely artificial, and there's no, you know, you can see there's no practical effects in it. It's completely computer generated, and it just looks awful. And I unfortunately I feel like Cobweb falls, goes into that same kind of space once there is that the big unveiling of the monster, and it was like, oh my god, it was so lame. Um, and for me, it was such a big thing and such a big a big unveiling of the monster because there is all of this buildup that it honestly took me out of the movie. Two examples, like I mentioned at the top of the show, two movies that I actually really loved this year that came out: Long Legs and Into Violent Nature. Similar to a degree about how, as far as the revealing of the monster. A film like Long Legs, again, starring Nicolas Cage. You don't see Nicolas Cage, who plays Long Legs. You don't really see him for quite. You don't. You get glimpses of him, but what you see is incredibly creepy and scary, and you kind of want to see more. The same thing with the killer in A Violent Nature. There is you kind of get everything is from his perspective, but you don't really see him actually. But you get glimpses of him, and you see from his perspective, and it's really unique and it's something we've never really seen before, especially in the slasher genre. But the thing that with those movies that I thought they did really well when it comes to that, they do have the grand monster reveal, if you will, the unveiling, but they do it in a really unique way, and they do it in a not a paint by numbers. It's not done by a paint by numbers method, and it's satisfying. It makes sense. It For me, it kept me engaged, and I thought it was very interesting. And I think in the cases of those films, it really relied on practical effects. With Cobweb, it's clearly not that at all. It's clearly pure, CGI, and I just felt that was a bad call. Again, another example, like I said, of it going really wrong is The Last Meter. That film is, I think, Cobweb is a much better film than The Last Meter. Like, I think Cobweb is kind of worth checking out. I do want to see it again, but I felt like, again, these are examples for me of where I felt like the movie kind of went off the rails a little bit. And I felt obviously the big monster reveal, it was pretty bad. That being said, I do think that it is better than The Last Meter, but it suffers from that same thing. And it's I was a little bit bummed out by it. So I don't know. It's pretty mixed bag. Pretty mixed bag. It had a lot. It has. I would say there are more positive things around in this film than there are negative things. But I just thought there could have been some better creative choices in all honesty, particularly around the two story kind of plot twists into where the narrative goes, especially around the the, the, the teacher who is one of the main characters in the story and her relationship to the family, and then also, mainly, realistically, it's mainly the reveal of the monster. Like that's something that's really hard. That's a tough pill to swallow. So anyway, I don't know. Check it out. If I'm curious to see what people think of the movie. Pretty mixed bag. Overall, it's a good movie and worth checking out. Particularly around the family, the characters, the family dynamic, the atmosphere in the film. Very, very cool and interesting, but there are some things that are I th- definite that are definite examples of some misfires. But anyway, thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.